Execution is moving forward.
We're at the People's House of Idaho, and the power of government to take a human life is the one thing that none of us here want to give the government.
So many faith organizations, civil rights organizations, and individual Idahoans are here standing in opposition to this execution.
Life is not ours to take or to end.
We stand here once again to protest the action of the state and its use of the barbaric system of the death penalty.
We're now in the Idaho State Capitol. We're going to go into the governor's office, ask to be heard, and share our petition and our demand that they halt this execution.
It's just amazing the number of people that have come out in support at various churches and elsewhere. We hope to have a really good turnout tomorrow to our last chance to oppose the execution of Thomas Creech.
I'm a clergy in the United Methodist Church, and this morning I'm gathered with a group of clergy and laity to protest the execution of Thomas Creech.
This didn't solve anything. This didn't help anything. Just thinking today of all the victims and just praying for the whole process.
First, I'd like to express my deep gratitude for Abe and Suzanne for coming out and organizing us and helping us to get our heads around what this means in our society and in our community.
So death penalty action comes wherever we need to go to support local abolitionists who want to stand up and lift their voices to oppose executions. It's an honor for us to have groups like the ACLU and the United Methodist Church and others ask us to come and help them. And that's what we do. We help lift up the voices of people who want to say no to executions. Well, good evening and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Abe Bonowitz. I'm the Executive Director of Death Penalty Action, and we're joined tonight by a number of folks from the states where some of these executions that are upcoming will be happening. I want to say from the get-go that this is a space for people who oppose the death penalty, so everybody is welcome, and we invite you to put where you're from and where you're watching from, and any comments and questions that you have in the chat, or to use the Q&A feature. We generally don't take comments online from people that are in the audience just because we've got so many panelists that are already planned. So we invite you to put your questions and comments in the chat. And if it makes sense, then sometimes we will bring somebody up into the panel. But tonight we've got a pretty full program and there's a lot happening. I also want to say that Death Penalty Action brings together people that are united based on our opposition to the death penalty. And we come from a lot of different spaces. And people who express their own opinions are expressing their own opinions and don't necessarily speak for Death Penalty Action. Only Death Penalty Action board members wearing that hat, or staff such as myself and Ali, are speaking for the organization. And when we are speaking for our own opinion, we take off that hat. But just to be clear, that this is an opportunity to hear from all perspectives, and we expect and share all perspectives. So with that, typically what we will do is go in order of the executions that are scheduled. We are expecting a special guest with regard to Robert Robertson, and she is not here yet as far as I can tell. So let's go ahead and talk about Alabama's execution. There's 2 executions scheduled, 3 that we're going to be talking about tonight. Just on Friday, South Carolina set a new date, and Reverend Hillary Taylor is here, the Executive Director of South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, so we'll hear from her in a little bit. But we've got with us folks from Alabama to talk about Derek Dearman, who is scheduled for execution on the 17th, and also that night. And of course, we will be talking about the execution of the possible execution of Robert Robertson in Texas at the same time on the same night. But Let's go ahead and talk about Derek Dearman in Alabama. And with us is his spiritual advisor, who expects to be in the death chamber with him once again. We're going to be the 9th or 10th time, Jeff, in 2 years. The 9th time in 2 years that Jeff will be accompanying somebody to their death. But so with us from Alabama, we've got Reverend Hopkins and Esther Brown of Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty, and Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood. So Jeff, why don't you start us out?
First and foremost, we have with us the nation's foremost abolitionist, Miss Esther Brown. I always want to give her her flowers because this is somebody, again, who is 91 years old. Forgive me, Esther, for even saying it, but 91 years old and leading the only death row inmate centric abolitionist organization or anti-death penalty organization in the country. So as always, I want to make sure that we say that first and foremost to get started. Derek is a fascinating case in a lot of ways. I've known Derek for going on about a year now, I guess, and Derek is one of these persons who wants to be executed. He has very strong beliefs with regards to the death penalty. And those beliefs that he has about the death penalty is probably the opposite of the beliefs that anybody here would have about the death penalty. He very much believes that he should be executed. He very much believes that this is his punishment for the crime. He, doesn't see this as he doesn't see this in any way as something that is anything other than something that he needs to do to repent of what he has done. Now, his crime is particularly horrendous. He killed, I believe it's 5 people, one of whom was pregnant. It was an axe murder. Also involved a shotgun. I'll spare you the gory details, but certainly a horrible situation. When I got involved with Derek, he presented to me a number of very difficult ethical questions. As somebody who is an abolitionist, someone who is categorically opposed to the death penalty, I had to reason with working with someone who was not. And not just was not, but was not for himself opposed to the death penalty. And I think that oftentimes when we engage this work, especially those of us who are ministers and spiritual advisors, there are a number of hats you wear in situations like this. You have the activist and the advocacy hat, but you also have the spiritual hat. And I think that when Derek came to me, he was asking me to walk with him in the spiritual space far more than he was asking me to walk with him in the advocacy space. And I think a number of people who are in ministry and do this work can understand that sometimes the tension that exists there. He has, in recent weeks, gotten back in touch with his 2 sons, helped him do that. And that's been a pretty miraculous thing. These are sons that haven't spoken to him in 16, 17, 18 years. And so there's been a really beautiful resolution. Been thankful to work with Esther and Project Hope. We have helped him get his funeral arrangements together, and I'm thankful that we were able to do that. And I think that there's also this this sort of tension for us, in engaging this, right? We want to uplift Derek's agency. Derek is making this decision. There's no getting around that. He doesn't want this to be seen as something that he has to do. He doesn't want to be seen as an assisted suicide. He doesn't want it to be seen as something that he is forced to do. He very much believes that this is what he needs to do. And as someone who has come to love him, who has a difference of opinion. Far be it from me to question what he believes that he has to do. Lastly, I'll say that this is not the easiest of cases to deal with regards to the death penalty and the work that we do to try to end the death penalty. But at the same time, I guess I'm asking everybody to approach this situation as a human being that is interested in the well-being of another human being, interested in uplifting the agency of another human being. And I just ask that you join me in walking this path with him that he has chosen.
Thank you, Jeff. Esther, you want to add anything, or Lynn?
Yes, I would love to. I don't know. Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Wonderful. First of all, of course, I want to thank the Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood. I leave it at that, but he knows what I feel and what I think. And for us, obviously, this isn't easy because most of us, and I'm meaning us on death row, I'm not, I'm the one person on the outside, want to abolish the death penalty. It's our name, Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty. But that's not all that we are. We are a death row organization. And if we can't respect the individual, who else will? It's hard for us on death row, and forgive me if I say we, to be respected as human beings. So this has been quite difficult for us, and I must say it's been quite difficult for me. But I spoke to various members of our advisory board who are on the outside, Lynn Hopkins being one of them. And I hardly had to say anything. I just opened my mouth and I said, we need to respect the individual, his wishes. And they all agreed. And that, I have to say, was wonderful. It made it easier for me. So we don't say it's assisted suicide because it really isn't. And that's unfair, to do this to this man. And if he feels that this is a way of atoning, we're all different. We can actually only speak for ourselves. We are all different. So we are not protesting because it seems to be disrespecting this man. And so I think for us, it is more important to respect it. I have to say, I can't say how grateful I am to the Reverend, to Jeff Hood, a friend, to all of us. We're all very grateful, and we're glad that he is part of our organization. We're glad that he's there. We're glad that we talked to him, that he called me, and the first thing he says, hello, friend. It is the individual that we have to care for and that we do care for. And I hope people understand that and respect that. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Reverend Hopkins, do you want to add anything? I've got a few comments myself, but I'll let you go first.
I just wanted to echo what others have said in terms of this being really intention, because I abhor the process by which he will die. There is nothing about it that can be redeemed. And but at the same time, to me, it was readily apparent that here was a man who has been stripped of all agency and autonomy. And the one thing that I am able to do is to honor his right to make decisions about the course of his own life, when no one in the official system would even consider doing that. As a minister, I'm often explaining to people, look, it doesn't matter that your loved one didn't want a memorial service. Memorial services are not for the deceased. We do that anyway, regardless of the intention, because it's about healing. So I had to recognize that's not what this is. What we do through Death Penalty Action and Project Hope and all of us gathered is active opposition to the killing of someone who is being unjustly killed. And if he makes the judgment that this is, in his own mind and spirit, a just act, then disagree as I might, I honor his conclusions.
Thank you, Reverend Hopkins. So I want to share that I've been back and forth with Esther and with Jeff, and also spoken about it with a few others. And we too, Death Penalty Action, are going to some degree, respect that Mr. Dierman wants to have his autonomy and choose to allow his punishment to go forward, and in fact insist on it. But I also want to maintain that this is the government taking a life unnecessarily and through a system that is broken irreparably. And therefore, what you have seen from the collaboration of Death Penalty Action with Project Hope to abolish the death penalty and others throughout Alabama has been a consistent set of actions, petition deliveries, petition signature gathering, and protests at the time of the execution and all that sort of thing. And it will not be nearly as intense as it has been these past executions, or as it will be, especially coming up next with the next Alabama execution. However, we're going to maintain a petition because we as abolitionists have an obligation and a right to say the death penalty is wrong. And this would not be happening if the death penalty did not exist. And that doesn't mean that we can't respect Derek Dierman's agency to do what he's doing. He's actually manipulating all of us in addition to the system, to his benefit, to his desires. And I can't fault him. I can't say I wouldn't do that myself. So that's the reality. So you're not going to see nearly the same level of intensity that we would normally do, but we're going to maintain a petition and we're going to have a virtual vigil. And if folks in Alabama choose to show up at the prison or to deliver that petition outside of Project Hope to abolish the death penalty, we'll support that work too, because there's more than just one abolitionist group. And I think that we're all united and recognize that each group has to figure out how it's going to move forward in this particular situation. So I think I'm going to just stop spotlighting myself so we can see. I think that's, Lynn or Esther in particular as leaders in Alabama. I hope that sits well with you. I think it's what our conversation has been. And, that's kind of where we're at.
Yes.
So, Jeff, if you can, go ahead.
I want to just jump in real quick and make a slight, point. I think it's very difficult to say that someone is manipulating us when their choices are so few, and their agency is so limited, as Lynn said. I mean, I think that Derek Dearman has a lot of things, and I'm not going to sit here and talk about who he is personally or anything like that. But I do think it's important to state, as Lynn did, this is somebody who has seen all of their choices, all of their agency been stripped away. And here is a moment where he has chosen to exercise his agency. And I don't feel like that's manipulation in any regard when it comes to us. I think that it is something that he's choosing for himself. And like I said, I feel like it's my job, our job, to stand with him.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll just note that I think the number that Rob Dunham said the other night when we talked about people who waived their appeals was about 1 in 10 waived their appeals and asked to be executed. And this is the very first time that anybody has said, I don't want you guys doing what you do. And we're even talking about it. So I don't want to get any deeper than that. Just the point is, what we want people to know is that this has been a deep conversation and deep introspection that everybody has been having. And, the various groups that are represented here have decided how they're moving forward. So you're not going to see the same level of activity, but there's going to be a petition for people to sign, and there's going to be a live virtual vigil for people who want to be prayerfully protesting online as we do. And Jeff has already said he will come out of the prison and share with us his experience of that execution when it's over. So that's and hopefully that will be the only execution that night. So with that, I want to see if Anna, are you able to send a note over to Manuela and see if she'll be joining us? I sent one too, and she hasn't responded. So let's
I already did.
What's that?
I already did. I just did a second ago.
Okay, good. So hopefully she'll join us. But let's shift over to South Carolina. So Reverend Hillary Taylor is here from, she's the executive director of South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. And this is also a person that, that we know a bit about, mainly because was it 3 years ago that he had his date, and, Allie and myself and Shane Claiborne and others were all there in South Carolina working to help build opposition to that execution. And then everything was put on hold when the courts intervened to say they're going to examine the constitutionality of the firing squad and the electric chair, which has been done, and they've said it's okay, and that's why executions are moving forward. And with that, in that interim time, South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty became an entity and hired Reverend Hillary Taylor as their executive director. So Hillary, we are grateful for you being with us. Please share with us what's going on with Mr. Moore and how can people help?
Sure. Thank you, friends, for being here tonight. Again, my name is Reverend Hillary Taylor. I'm the executive director of South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. I'm parked safely, so no worries about where I am. I'm in a rest stop. I'm on my way from Columbia, South Carolina to Greenville, South Carolina. There was speaking with some college students actually tonight for the beginning of our journey of Palmetto Journey of Hope speaking series in conjunction with Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing, which we've been able to do for the last 2 years. So Richard Moore is the first person to have run out of his appeals process in South Carolina. He ran out of his appeals in December of 2020. And that, my friends, is when the state of South Carolina decided, you know what, let's pass a bill that restarts executions. And so that's how we got the firing squad bill. That's how we had a kind of rigmarole of legal actions around whether the firing squad and the electric chair were constitutional. They have been found constitutional. It is why Freddie Khalil Owens was executed 2 weeks ago. So we were actually expecting Richard to receive the first execution date. There are a couple of reasons why Khalil received it instead. Some of it was that his co-defendant started singing like a canary about how a plea deal was made with the Greenville County Solicitor's Office without ever filing any kind of notice in the court of law. And they lied about that plea deal under oath. So that's part of it. Khalil was also the first named person in the lawsuit against the firing squad in the electric chair with its constitutionality. Also, he was just kind of not as likable as some of the other folks on death row. And so, for all these reasons and possibly some other ones, that is why I personally think that Khalil got his death sentence first. Richard is somebody who is extremely sympathetic and therefore is going to be our most important, in some ways, clemency case. Obviously, all of them are important, and we do everything we can to make sure that people receive the best advocacy possible. But Richard's case is one that is going to bring more people to the table. Unfortunately, we have to couch it like that, and we have to just recognize that some cases are like that. So let me tell you a little bit about Richard's case. Richard Moore's crime does not, by any fair standard, warrant the death penalty. If he is executed, it will be because of racial bias. Richard Moore is a Black man sentenced to death for the 1999 shooting of a convenience store clerk named James Mahoney. Richard entered the store unarmed and defended himself when Mahoney pulled 2 guns on him. Moore wrestled one of the guns away, and both Moore and Mahoney were shot. Mahoney died from his injuries. No other South Carolina death penalty case has involved an unarmed defendant who defended himself when the victim threatened him with a weapon. So there's a whole article written about this by Jennifer Berry Hawes in the Post and Courier. We encourage you to check that out if you would like. The title of that article is "As Firing Squad Looms, Man Facing Execution Shares His Death Row Story." So a little bit more about Richard's death sentence and it being a product of racial bias. Prosecutors struck all eligible African-American jury members from the jury that sentenced Richard to death. He's the last person on South Carolina's death row sentenced by an all-white jury. Richard is Black and the victim was white, and former South Carolina Supreme Court Justice Kay Hearn called Richard's death sentence a relic of a bygone era. There's another Greenville News article about his case in this way by Catherine Castile. Again, encourage you to look that up. Election politics led to Richard's death sentence. So after Richard's arrest, an intense primary took place for the Spartanburg County Solicitor's Office. The incumbent Holman Gossett sought the death penalty almost exclusively in cases involving white victims and accused challenger Trey Gowdy of the Benghazi committee fame in the U.S. House of Representatives. He accused Trey Gowdy, who was running as the opponent, of being weak on the death penalty. And between the time that Gossett lost the primary and Gowdy's installation as solicitor, Gossett decided the state would seek the death penalty against Richard, despite it being a weak case for death. This put Trey Gowdy in a position of having to continue to press for the death penalty or dropping the death penalty and appearing soft as predicted by Gossett. Richard is not the same person that the jury sentenced to death. Richard is a 59-year-old loving father and grandfather. He has spent more than 20 years on death row trying to make up for the tragic mistakes that he made before his arrest. Former director of South Carolina Department of Corrections, John Osment, says that Richard would be a powerful force for good if he were granted clemency and resentenced to life without parole. Richard is a loving father and grandfather. Killing Richard will create more victims by taking him away from his daughter, Alexandria, son, Lyndall, and 2 granddaughters, ages 5 and 3 months old. Despite his incarceration, Richard has maintained a close, loving relationship with his children. They recall him helping them with their schoolwork while they were younger and offering fatherly support and advice throughout their lives. So with his love and support, Alexandria actually joined the Air Force and married a fellow Air Force member and is the mother of those two granddaughters. And Lyndall graduated as the valedictorian of his high school, graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and now works in Detroit. Craig Melvin actually interviewed Alexandria on MSNBC. We encourage you to look at that. For all of these reasons, my friends, and many others, Richard Moore deserves to live. He deserves to have his death sentence changed into any alternative prison term. So Allie has probably posted this already. We already have a toolkit that is live, and you can either click on the links that she has shared, or you can go to www.scadp.org/advocate, and you'll be able to find the toolkit. You'll be able to find the talking points. You will be able to find a button that will allow you to join our toolkit launch so that you can learn a little bit more about the case and Richard and some of the things that that his lawyer is anticipating. You may be able to ask the direct questions to his legal team as well. So we encourage folks to register so that they can see the toolkit for themselves, or if you just want to go ahead and use the toolkit, go for it. There are graphics, there are sample tweets. There is an amazing amount of effort that has been put forward for this specific case. We are very grateful for all of the hours that went into it and all of the team players that have been connected to this. As Abe mentioned, Richard's case has already received one death warrant. It was actually in 2022. I'm not exactly sure what happened in 2021, but there were two other cases that got death warrants before Richard did. But Richard's was the first in 2022. And so we've been through this before. We believe that Richard is maybe the best case, or the best chance we have for clemency in South Carolina. So we will continue to petition to Governor McMaster about the clemency and why Richard deserves clemency. October 10th, we are planning on having a press conference with faith leaders who will be advocating against the death penalty. That is also World Day Against the Death Penalty. There are lots of other things that are going on that day. We encourage you to connect with lots of other organizations, including DPA, about where and what's happening locally to you. Those are all the things that I have that I can think of. Abe, what am I missing?
Oh gosh, Hillary, you have been very thorough. I want to note that we have Death Penalty Action set up a petition for Richard back in 3 years ago when his first execution date was set. More than 6,000 people have signed that petition so far. So whatever the presentation of petition signatures are, we will be grateful to be collaborative with you in having those turned in as well. And on our petition, as we almost always do when there's something to link to, we have linked to the South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty petition, so you can get a much greater detail there, which has been developed since we first set up our petition. Of course, ours has been updated. And as well, there is a link to the toolkit straight on the petition. So that's our entire goal. And one of the reasons why, as you know, Hillary, Death Penalty Action always maintains its own petition in every case, is so that we can continue to invite people to action on the case of the petition, but also on all the other things that are happening. So Jeff had a question or a comment. Let's see, here you go. Jeff?
Hey, Hillary. Y'all are doing great, first of all. Appreciate y'all's hard work there in South Carolina. I just more had a general question or a general comment to sort of engage. I know that for me, this is really a very difficult hour when it comes to each of these cases, when it comes to trying to figure out like what different ways to speak about these cases, because I feel like I've experienced this with Emmanuel Littlejohn. I felt like we did every possible thing that we could do. We wrote, we signed, we made videos, we did interviews. I mean, on and on and on, to the point where, and of course you're catching me on the tail end of that, completely exhausted. But I guess I'm just curious, as far as South Carolina, what can South Carolina and y'all's work teach the rest of us about the way that you organize one of these campaigns, or the way that y'all are organizing? I guess I'm just thinking, man, maybe there's something that we can take from South Carolina, or maybe there's something that y'all are doing that could help the rest of us.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm not sure we'll be successful necessarily. Jeff, thank you for thinking that there's something that we could teach the movement. What I will say is that you're catching me on a good week. We have a virtual book club that meets every other month. This past week, we covered You Shall Not Condemn by Reverend Dr. Jennifer McBride, who was a kind of spiritual advisor and teacher and mentor to the late Kelly Gissendaner, who was murdered by the state of Georgia in 2015. She was the only woman on Georgia's death row for a long time. And what makes Kelly really special are several reasons. But one of their big things that is unique to Kelly is that she was a pen pal to a very prominent and famous Christian theologian named Jürgen Moltmann. Jürgen Moltmann is famous for his books, two specific books, many books, but two ones that come to mind that are really important for systematic theology nerds like me, and probably also you, Reverend Dr. Hood. Theology of Hope and The Crucified God. And we were talking with Jennifer McBride about her book, and she mentioned that after Kelly's execution, there was a big gathering of theologians in Atlanta, and Jürgen Moltmann was there, and there was a chance where people got to ask about, where is the hope in all of this, now that Kelly's executed. And there was this global effort to try and save her life, including a letter from the Pope and a judge who had written in the paper saying, I regret denying her a part of her post-conviction relief, and just hundreds of faith leaders locally and nationally who were joining in this space. And Jürgen Moltmann said, where is the hope? Well, hope is protest. And so that is the thing that I'm carrying with me into this specific clemency campaign, and that I need to just sort of, write in the mirror. South Carolina has a state saying, we have two state sayings, but the one that everybody always remembers is, while I breathe, I hope. And that is written in Latin on one of our, state crests somewhere. And I mean, I think one of the things that this movement has taught me is the power of story. And by telling the stories of these people who are on death row, right, we are able to make change, even if it feels infinitesimal. But these changes are meaning, like they matter, right? And so while we breathe, we hope. Hope is protest. So that is the thing that I'm going to offer tonight. It may not be life-changing necessarily, but I hope it will, get you through the next breath, and the next one and the next one, so that we can continue this kind of work. Because we have a lot of storytelling to tell. And I mean, I can tell you, at least in the last year, I have family members who have told me, like, you changed my mind. Like, I didn't believe you, and I kind of thought you were crazy for doing this work for all these years. And then I learned about the story of this person who was impacted by the death penalty that I knew growing up, and you connected me with their story. And I never heard their story in a way that I thought that they would ever be against the death penalty. So that's my long answer, friends, is just keep breathing, because, yeah, like, that's part of the hope.
Hillary, at the risk of taking us to a theological classroom, I'm looking down at my dear friend Lynn Hopkins. We are all like so, formed by liberation theology, by this idea that faith and spirituality can do something. I mean, Lynn, of course, with Troy Davis down there in Atlanta, me being at Emory and connecting with Troy Davis in that campaign, and seeing the Kelly Gissendaner, the campaign around Kelly Gissendaner and Moltmann and all these types of things. And when you talk about hope, it brings me all the way back to one of my favorite people on earth, and that is Dr. Cornel West. And this is not a campaign advertisement. I appreciate his theology right now more than the presidential campaign. But I just wanted to say that, he always talks about hope on a tightrope, and how, it's our job to do all that we can to stay on that tightrope. And, I guess I'm just thankful for the beauty of hope. And, when Moltmann just is consistently pushing into this idea that hope is growing because we're growing. This movement, the abolition movement, hope is growing because we're here and we're working together. So anyways, thank you, Hillary. And I appreciate you, Lynn, as well. And just this power of liberative spirituality, a liberative theology to really transform our society.
And for those who don't know, Cornel West is, was it the Green Party? What party is he the candidate for?
I think he's independent. He's been a couple of iterations of political parties at this point. But I'll also say that I'm not hyping up Emory right now either. But the first time I ever encountered Cornel West was at Emory as well.
And I only mention that for those, we got a lot of people from other countries on this as in the audience as well. So he's another candidate for president. You usually only hear from about the Republican, the Democrat, maybe the Libertarian, but there's a bunch of other people running too. Hillary, what y'all have done is also exhibit leadership in creating space for lots of different folks in South Carolina to come forward on this. And I know that one of the leading organizations that helped create South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty is the South Carolina Christian Action Network, if I have that right. And especially, and Lynn, I see your hand, but I want to ask, and I also want to give Allie a chance to share a bit because she has a personal relationship with Richard. But I just wanted to ask Hillary about the mobilization that hopefully is happening in the community of leadership of color about the race issue in this particular case, and if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I can share right now, and we will probably be launching some kind of rally press conference in the next 2 weeks, so please be on the lookout for that. But the NAACP is definitely very interested and has been very involved with Richard Moore's case specifically. And one of their young leaders, who's an advisor to the collegiate branches of the NAACP, has been a huge help in raising our profile and just raising this case and saying, like, the death penalty is something that we all need to care about. Like, even if you don't care about the death penalty, this case is different. This case, there are people who have done, somebody said, like Alec Murdaugh did worse and never got the death penalty. That's precisely what this is, right? There are so many people who do way worse things, have way more aggravating circumstances, and they never considered for the death penalty. And Alec Murdaugh is the prime example in recent South Carolina memory, right? Somebody who has white victims, somebody who committed a double homicide, in addition to potentially a bunch of other bodies around him, right? All kinds of financial fraud, I mean, it's just like, this is different. Richard Moore should never have been given a death sentence. We need to do the right thing, and we need to commute his sentence to alternative prison terms.
Super. Lynn, Reverend Lynn Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Abe. I just, this is a little bit in line with what's going on right now with our conversation around Mr. Dearman's case and our response to it, the ways in which it is an elevated moral, theological, spiritual, political ideology struggle, and also intensely personal and practical. I just want to publicly express my gratitude to Hillary. On the night of Keith's execution here in Montgomery, she was in town with the group, and at the end of a long day of being in Montgomery with a bunch of folks, she stopped by and they spent some time there in vigil with me, and
the live virtual vigil as well. We all remember.
Yeah.
And that's what we all need to be doing, is supporting each other's vigils and being present when we can, especially in neighboring states. I've been encouraging that forever.
That was just a real act of direct ministry to me in that moment, and I wanted to thank you, Hillary, for that.
Absolutely, Lynn. Thank you for your work and your witness and your care. I'm glad that we could be present for you, and it's good to see you again tonight.
Thank you.
I'm sorry we have to see each other again.
Yeah.
Under these circumstances, Allie Sullivan, you've known Richard for a long time. Can you just share about him personally a little bit?
Yeah, so I met Richard in 2021, shortly after we had the whole thing in South Carolina when Khalil and Brad first got their dates in 2021, the summer of 2021. And I don't know how to describe Richard other than he is just such a good, wholesome person to have in your circle. I mean, he almost in a way feels a little bit like a big brother. Like he's just really like him and I can easily be on the phone for a few hours and just talk and just like I don't know, he just I've not met anybody else on death row that I can just talk to like I have Richard. And yeah, he I don't know how else to describe him other than wholesome. He is just like a really loving, wholesome person. And I we haven't talked in a while, and a couple of weeks ago we were able to catch up, and like we were on the phone for like an hour, and we could have easily been on the phone for 6 hours. Um but yeah, they've changed up how like the folks that are imminently at risk of execution, they've moved them to a different part of the prison and kind of segregated them from the rest of the folks. And so I haven't been able to talk to him on the phone in a couple of weeks, but yeah, I don't know. He's just really exciting or it's just really exciting to talk to him. And like Khalil, in a different way, though, he has shown just a tremendous amount of strength throughout this time. I mean, you can tell every time I talk to him or every time he sends a message, like he, he's at peace. Certainly, he doesn't want to be executed, but he is at peace and he's just like trying to approach this situation as courageously as possible, and it's really remarkable to see. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. He's just a really great friend.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Ali. And you were in South Carolina with us when those dates were approaching. So Hillary has put in the chat just an acknowledgement also that Richard has not had any behavioral infractions while on death row. So it's one of the challenges that we have with this kind of case, and we're going to keep shining a spotlight. And Hillary, what's ours is yours, has always been the case. Whatever we can do to be helpful, we're grateful. Also, there's a number of your South Carolina folks in the audience tonight. I want to acknowledge all of you folks and our dear friends that are there in South Carolina. Thank you all. So before we move on from South Carolina, I do want to share, we made a few videos out of our work there, in particular a rally that was held. We're going to show that at the end of this program. The rally about that they had an alternative state flag that they were promoting. And anyway, you'll see when we get to that. But any other comments on the South Carolina situation? Hillary, I did want to ask, Abu Musa in the chat had asked, or in the Q&A, has Richard chosen a method of execution? Is there any talk about what that's going to look like? Obviously, if he ends up choosing firing squad, it's going to be a much bigger circus than just because of the method issue.
Yeah, that will officially be made 14 days before the execution. So we anticipate not this coming Friday, but the next Friday that will be announced.
Okay, we don't know what but he gets to choose on his own time what he's going to do. That's one of the things that we're doing, is forcing prisoners to choose how they're going to die. Or in the case of Khalil, he chose not to choose because it was counter to his faith teaching, so his lawyer had to choose for him. And what an extra burden she had to take on, So just to be clear, for us, it's not about how we kill our prisoners, but that we kill them when the system is as broken as it is. Okay, so We're going to move on to the last execution that's currently scheduled in the next 30 days, and that is the case of Robert Robertson. We had hoped to be joined by his wife. She wasn't positive that she'd be able to make it, but Manuela is allied with what we're doing and is and also there's the Innocence Project is very clear that they want people involved in the case to be very focused on what they're doing. So she is not with us tonight. We're not exactly sure why, but we know that they're looking for all the advocacy they can get. And Robert Robertson's case, just to spell it out, is another one of those cases where there was no crime. It's a shaken baby case. And again, if you go to our petition, there's links directly over to the Innocence Project petition in this case, and you'll be able to read all about it. You're going to be hearing all about it. One of the things I'm grateful for that we actually had a really robust conversation about Richard in South Carolina and Derek in Alabama, because what happens when you have one of these high-profile cases like the one. I was in the synagogue the other day and a friend said, hey, I saw a story on NBC about this guy in Texas. So NBC National News, Friday night, or whatever night that was, had a whole story about Robert Robertson. And the New York Times has had a whole series of stories and videos and all sorts of things about Robert Robertson. It is clear that there was no crime. And it is clear that part of the issues here is a shaken baby syndrome case, and that whole issue has been debunked. And on top of that, it turns out he's on the autism spectrum, which answers the question about why his affect was neutral when confronted with the question of the possible murder of his own child. He just didn't have the emotional reaction that you would expect in that kind of situation. And people said that must be because he did it. And it's only now, well, recently, that it's being brought to light, the fact of his condition with regard to the autism spectrum. So Ali is putting in the chat the link to the video. It's going to be very, very difficult to find any information over the next couple of weeks about any other death penalty issue, except Richard Glossip. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But that's going to be the big case. And that's why, we always make sure it's important that we're talking about all the cases. And that's why I'm grateful that tonight we had a robust conversation about the other two. We don't really have anybody that's an expert or directly connected, other than Ali also has a relationship with Robert Robertson. So we're going to give her a moment to talk about that. But, look at what's out there in the world, and we're going to be sharing stuff on our social media among all the others. And that's what we're going to urge everybody that's watching, actually. Also, let's make sure we're all lifting up all of these cases, not just the one that is, pardon the expression, the sexy case of the day. This is the case everybody's going to be looking at because it's an innocence case, because the Innocence Project is putting all these resources into it, and God bless them that they can do that. I'm thankful that they can do that, and somebody has to speak up for the others, and that's what we're doing. Ali?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about Robert for a moment. When I was in Texas this summer visiting a number of folks on the row, I was there when Ramiro Gonzalez was executed. I actually saw Robert a few times in person. It's kind of strange seeing these folks in person for the first time because you've seen their face plastered all over social media and all over the news, and then to just walk by and they're right there, it's just kind of jarring. But it was really wonderful to see him in person, even though at that time he didn't know who I was. But I've been really good friends with his wife for the last several years. I was actually there visiting on Texas Death Row the day her and Robert got married. And I was visiting my good friend Kasol Chantakuman, who's no longer with us, but it was just so special seeing how happy Manuela was that day. And that evening, me and another one of our friends took her to dinner so that she could celebrate a little bit, because of course she couldn't celebrate with Robert. But I just think back, I remember exactly like everything that happened that day, and it was just really special to see how just excited and happy and joyful that Manuela was. And then now to just see her going through this with Robert, it's just absolutely devastating to see what this is doing to her and to others who know and love Robert. And um yeah, I just wanted to, Abe talked a bit about his case, but his daughter Nikki was unresponsive. She was like 2 years old, and she had all kinds of different health issues. And one of her health issues essentially made her stop breathing. And sometimes she would turn like blue. And so and she had a number of more acute health issues that at that time, I think this was in 2002, we were using drugs to treat certain health issues that we no longer use for children, and in many cases, not even for adults. And so there was just a lot of stuff going on with her that day that she passed away. And I mean, it is absolutely clear that no crime occurred, and she just succumbed to her health issues. And so this is really devastating to see her father about to be executed for something that it wasn't his fault. And I just think about Melissa Lucio's case a lot too in this time. And it's just really devastating that these folks go through losing one of their children, and on top of that, they're punished and they're condemned very publicly for what happened. And so I don't know, it's really devastating to just see all that has happened to Robert since Nikki passed away, and what's happening to Manuela. But we stand with them, and that's all. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm glad you mentioned Melissa Lucio, and there's other cases too where no crime occurred, but it's a dead child and somebody's got to pay. You know, we saw that in Lamont Hunter as well, who's the most recent person released off of death row in Ohio. He took a plea in order to not risk waiting another 2 years before they realized there was no evidence against him. But it's the same thing. You know, the child died through no fault of Lamont's, and he went to death row for 16 years. And in any case, thank you for that. Again, we're going to be watching and seeing all kinds of stuff happening about that. I want to note quickly that there's new execution dates set in Indiana, December 18th, Oklahoma, December 19th. Idaho, we anticipate a new date set anytime now for Robert Creech. Unfortunately, I don't know if anybody's in the audience tonight from Idaho, but I see the fires going on there. Just the other day, Thomas Creech's attorney posted just the amount of burn that happened outside of Boise during her workday. And it was just astounding to see. And of course, our prayers go out to everybody that's dealing with that catastrophe, as well as what's happened in the wake of the Hurricane Helene throughout Florida and all the way up Arkansas or Alabama and North Carolina. And then there's another hurricane heading through Florida. I used to live in Florida. I still get that clenching feeling every time I see a hurricane out in the Gulf or in the Atlantic. In any case, wanted to mention that those new dates, and it's possible we'll get one or two more dates this year. So I think there's still 8 execution dates set in October, November, and December. So far, we could see more. Also coming up this week on Thursday, is it Thursday or Wednesday? What's the 9th? Wednesday is the 9th. Richard Glossip is at the U.S. Supreme Court in a very interesting case that is basically the question being, does the Attorney General of a state have the power to withdraw an execution or a death sentence, or and to intervene? And the real issue with that, and maybe Jeff, you want to address this a little bit, because I think you could probably articulate it a little bit better than I. But depending on what happens in the Glossip case with this U.S. Supreme Court, if he prevails, it could negatively impact others. we're not looking for anything other than each person to not get killed. But when the law is decided and shifted based on some of these arguments, and there's in particular cases in Tennessee that could end up going bad because of whatever the decision is, one way or the other. Jeff, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I won't. I don't want to say too much, but I will say this: each of these cases, if they don't stand on their own, they have the potential to affect other cases around the country. And so, my prayer is that Rich receives relief from the United States Supreme Court that is wonderful and helpful and ultimately leads to him being freed. And I hope to him and Leah get to live happily ever after, and it'd be this wonderful and beautiful story. They are my friends and I love them very much. They're wonderful. The thing that we don't want is a broad decision that is written in such a way that gives certain parties or various parts of the I guess the process, including attorney generals, including state officials, more control or more power than they should have. For instance, in a place like Oklahoma, you have the attorney general advocating for Rich, which is a wonderful thing, a beautiful thing. In other states, you have attorney generals that are categorically opposed to and wanting people to be executed. It's the opposite scenario. And in a place like Tennessee, you have a situation where local district attorneys are seeing their power stripped away by the attorney general's office, and there's a legal fight going on right now to determine who gets the bigger say on these cases. Well, in a place like Tennessee, you have Memphis and you have Nashville that are, fairly strong progressive spaces, progressive strongholds. And, if you're on death row in Tennessee and the, DA in Memphis is saying, hey, we want to, we don't want this person to be executed. Just like we saw in St. Louis, you have a local prosecuting attorney say, we don't want this execution to go forward, but then you have an attorney general who jumps in and says, no, we do, and takes the case to the Supreme Court, and ultimately Marcellus Williams was executed. So again, it's complicated, but I want to state, very clearly, I hope that Rich gets the kind of relief that sends him home. We want Rich to go home, while at the same time not empowering attorney generals all over the country to kill any more of my friends.
Well put. Finally, and I'm sorry to see, I'm not sure if there's anybody else here from Germany, but Gabby must have crashed, and it's very late in Europe right now. But Gabby from the German coalition was on in the audience for a while, and in the email that I sent out this morning to those of you that are on Death Penalty Action's email list, and you'll be seeing it on our social media, one of the fascinating things that has been created around this year's 22nd annual World Day Against the Death Penalty, a project of the World Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, I think, which is always October 10th, so coming up this week. In Germany, they've got a blog series and a video series connecting and celebrating the friendships of people, pen friends, pen pals with people on death row, and also death row prisoners, articulating that they are not only the worst thing, but the thing that got them on death row. So watch for that. There's going to be lots of different events happening in different countries and different states. Hillary mentioned the press conference that they're doing in South Carolina on the morning of World Day Against the Death Penalty. The Catholic Mobilizing Network has a whole listing that they're keeping. I sent out links to that this morning, so watch for that. Death Penalty Action is in partnership with the Ohio Council of Churches and Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing on a conversation that we recorded the other night with our board chair, Reverend Sharon Risher, and the Journey board chair, Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan Jr., as well as former police commissioner, Deacon George Kane. A powerful conversation. That's going to go live. We'll be putting that up on our various social media channels on the 10th at 10 a.m. Eastern time, so watch for that. And there'll be lots of other options. And the good news about all this stuff that's being online is that we can watch it later. It's recorded. You don't have to spend your whole day in meetings and Zooms and all that on that. I personally, if any of you are in Washington, D.C., I'll be at there's a play this is on the Catholic Mobilizing Network thing, but Charles Keith and I will be in DC at this play that's happening on the 8th. I'm blanking on the name of it, but it'll come to me like as soon as we hang up. And then also the Catholic Mobilizing Network is celebrating its 15th anniversary with an event that they've been doing each year now at the Papal Nuncio. So that's always a powerful event, and they're honoring Dale Resinella and Witness to Innocence. Dale Resinella, of course, if you don't know him, he wrote the book, The Biblical Truth About America's Death Penalty. I've got it on my bookshelf somewhere around here. And he has done prison death row ministry in Florida for decades. And then also Witness to Innocence, the organization made of exonerated death row survivors. So they're the honorees at the event. And the other thing that's happening that we haven't said a lot about, but this is also super exciting, you'll be hearing more from us about this, is Charles and I will be with folks in Delaware to celebrate Delaware's passage and signing last week. Governor Carney signed the bill that scrubs the death penalty from the Delaware statute. The Delaware Supreme Court reviewed Delaware's law in the wake of the Hearst ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court and found the Delaware statute to be unconstitutional. So it's been out of the picture, and everybody's been off for death row in Delaware since, I think, 2015 or 16. Well, this year, on June 30th, they passed the bill that scrubs the death penalty out. And the really neat thing is that they have this bell that they had made in Delaware. It's been rung, tolled outside of executions in Delaware. The last execution there, I think, was in 2011. They're giving that bell to the For Whom the Bells Toll Project and Death Penalty Action for us to take and use in front of other executions. And that's exciting to us. You're going to hear more about that. You're going to see more about that. That's coming up. And there's a bunch more coming up around World Day Against the Death Penalty. So that's everything I've got. Are there any questions or any further comments from here? I want to appreciate everybody that stuck around this late for us. It's a little bit one of our longer programs tonight. But if there's no further comment, then Allie, do you have that video ready? So what I have here is a video that we made a few years ago when we were initially in South Carolina. Well, there was what happens in states where there hasn't been an execution in a long time is the state group sometimes sort of ages out and falls into, people just wither away when there isn't anything to be doing. And that's what happened. So we went and helped pull people back together. Everywhere we went, they said, hey, will you help us start a new organization? And that's what we did. And this was one of the things that was happening. We made this video out of interviews we did at this rally that was happening with a bigger group of folks. So that's our closing tonight. Allie, hit it. Thank you.
Coming down here, I thought about the history of South Carolina. It frightened me. I said, oh my God, this is the state that executed a child. This is the state that a person went into a church and shot up all these people inside that church. I said, oh my God, what are we getting ready to go into?
remember yesterday, George Junius Stinney, a 14-year-old African-American boy, electrocuted legally by the state of South Carolina in 1944. He was 5'1", 95 pounds when he was killed by the electric chair. And some would say we've come a long way, and others of us would say we've still got a long way to go.
There's been so much bloodshed here in this state, and yet they're still willing to take South Carolinian lives.
I think it's important that we make the connection between the idea of killing people via the death penalty and the Confederate state of mind, because it's the same attitude that some people aren't really people.
When we fight, we win. So if we want to win, we have got to be together. We've got to do this thing together. We have to continue to talk about it. And then after we talk, after we leave here, we have to do something about it.
What ends up determining who gets executed is not the atrocity of the crime, but the resources of the defendant, the race of the victim, and it is time for the death penalty to go. South Carolina will look better without the Confederate flag, and it will look better without the death penalty.
And with that, thank you all very much.